Welcome to Stillwater Chronicles. Tonight, we settle into a story about a voicemail left from a number that doesn't exist. There is a particular quality to Sunday mornings in a ground floor flat. The light comes in at a low angle, pale and unhurried. It lies flat across the kitchen floor in long rectangles, touching the edge of the draining board, the corner of the fruit bowl, the dull gleam of the kettle. Outside, through the window, the cycle path is empty. A few wet leaves have pressed themselves against the curb. The trees at the far edge of the path stand without moving. It is the kind of morning that asks nothing of you. Rena stood at the kitchen counter in her gray cardigan, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone slightly cool. She hadn't drunk much of it. She had been standing there for a while, watching the light and the stillness of the path outside, not quite thinking about anything at all. This was something she was good at. The quiet emptying of a Sunday morning. The permission to simply be still before the week made its demands. She set the mug down on the draining board. She picked up her phone. There was no particular reason for it, just habit. The small, reflexive reach that morning people do without meaning to. The checking of the screen before the mind has fully committed to being awake. She pressed the button on the side. The screen came to life. There was a voicemail. She didn't get voicemails often. Most people texted. The notification sat there quietly, pale against the screen. One new message, received at 3:14 a.m. She looked at the number beneath it. It was long. Longer than it should have been. 14 digits, arranged in a way that felt slightly off. The way a word looks strange when you stare at it for too long. She counted them, slowly, with her thumb hovering. 14. Too many for any country code she could recall. She pressed play. The message was 12 seconds long, and then she heard her own voice. Not a recording of herself. Not the slightly flattened, unfamiliar version of yourself you hear on a video. The one that makes you think, do I really sound like that? No. This was her voice as she heard it from inside her own head. Warm and close, and unmistakably hers. The way your name sounds when you say it to yourself in the dark. The voice on the voicemail said, she's standing in the kitchen, the gray cardigan, both hands around the mug. She's looking out at the cycle path, and there's nothing on it. And then the message ended. Rena stood very still. The light had not changed. The kitchen was exactly as it had been. The draining board, the fruit bowl, the pale morning pressing softly against the window. The cycle path outside was empty. The trees were motionless. Nothing had moved. She looked down at the mug on the draining board. Both hands. She had been holding it with both hands. She was wearing her gray cardigan. She pressed play again. The 12 seconds returned. Her own voice, unhurried and level, describing a moment that had already passed. She listened to the words a second time and felt something shift inside her chest. Not panic. Not yet. But something quieter. A slow, settling wrongness. The way a photograph feels when you notice something in the background that shouldn't be there. She looked at the timestamp again. 3:14 a.m. She had been asleep at 3:14 a.m. She was certain of this. She remembered going to bed just before midnight, remembered the weight of the duvet, remembered the particular way the shadow of the curtain had fallen across the ceiling. She had not woken in the night. She had not been in the kitchen at 3:14 a.m. She had not been standing at this window. She had not left herself a voicemail. She set the phone face down on the counter and stood there for a moment, her hands resting flat on the cool surface. She was aware of the sound of the building around her, the faint tick of a pipe somewhere in the wall, the low and constant hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a bicycle somewhere outside on the path, its wheels quiet on the wet tarmac, there and then gone. She turned the phone over again. She searched the number. She typed it carefully into a browser, all 14 digits, and looked at what came back. Nothing. A number format that matched no country, no provider, no registered service. She tried different combinations of it, removing a digit, rearranging. Still nothing. The number existed in the same way that a name does when you mishear it, with just enough shape to seem real, but no edges you could hold on to. She went back to the voicemail. She listened a third time. And this time she heard something she had missed before, at the very end of the 12 seconds, in the last breath of silence before the message cut off. There was a sound. Faint. Almost nothing. The kind of sound that disappears when you listen for it directly, and only exists at the edge of attention. A sound like the soft closing of a door, or a breath released very slowly, or the particular silence that follows when someone who has been standing very still decides to move. Rena put the phone down. She walked to the window. The cycle path was empty. The wet leaves were still against the curb. The trees at the far edge stood without moving. The pale morning light came through the glass and lay itself across the kitchen floor, across the draining board, across the corner of the fruit bowl. Everything was exactly as it should be. She stood there for a long time, looking out. She thought about the voice, the specific, close warmth of it, the unhurried way it had spoken, as if it was simply observing, not warning, not alarmed, just noting. She's standing in the kitchen, the gray cardigan, the mug in both hands, the empty cycle path. Accurate. Every detail accurate. She thought about how the message had arrived at 3:14 a.m., and she thought about dreams, about the strange certainty of things inside dreams, about how you can stand in a place you know and feel, that it is also somewhere entirely different, how the familiar can carry a wrongness that you cannot locate. She thought about whether she might have done something in the night that she did not remember, some quiet, somnambulant version of herself, moving through the flat, and finding her phone, and recording something, and sending it somewhere. But the number was 14 digits long, and the voice had said, "She's standing, not I'm standing. Not standing at the window. She's standing. The way you would describe someone you were watching." Rena picked up the mug from the draining board. It had gone completely cold now. She poured it down the sink and listened to the sound of it draining away. That small, ordinary sound. And she turned on the tap and rinsed the mug and placed it upside down on the draining board. She looked at her phone on the counter. She thought about playing it a fourth time. She found that she didn't want to. Not because she was frightened, or not only that, but because she had the sense that the message had said everything it intended to say, and that listening again would not change its contents, and that there was something in the 12 seconds that she did not quite want to make too familiar. Some things, she thought, are less frightening when left slightly out of focus. She put the kettle on again. The Sunday morning continued around her, slow and unhurried, the same as it had always been. The light moved incrementally across the floor as the sun shifted somewhere above the low cloud. A cyclist appeared on the path. Outside, a woman in a yellow jacket, moving quickly, head down against the cold, and then was gone. The refrigerator hummed. The kettle began its low building sound. Rena stood at the window and watched the path. She thought, whoever left that message knew what she was wearing, knew which room she was in, knew that her hands were around the mug, and that the path was empty, and that the morning was pale. She thought, the message was 12 seconds long, and in 12 seconds a voice that sounded exactly like hers had described this room, this cardigan, this morning, she thought. And the number it came from does not exist. The kettle boiled. She made her tea. She stood at the window with the new mug warm between her palms and looked out at the cycle path and tried to find something wrong with the view. A shadow that was the wrong shape. A stillness that was too still. Something at the edge of the frame that shouldn't be there. But there was nothing. Only the leaves and the wet tarmac, and the bare trees at the far edge standing quiet in the pale November light. She looked at her own reflection in the glass. Gray cardigan, mug held in both hands, a face she recognized looking back at her from the thin mirror of the window. Calm, slightly watchful, the expression of someone who is not quite sure what they are looking for, but has not yet stopped looking. After a while, she turned away from the window. She sat down at the kitchen table with her tea and her phone, and she did not play the voicemail again. She sat in the pale light of the Sunday morning, and she listened to the flat around her. The tick of the pipe, the hum of the fridge, the occasional sound of the world outside, going about its quiet business. And she thought about nothing in particular. The message remained on her phone. 12 seconds, 14 digits, a number that led nowhere. And every now and then, without quite meaning to, she would look up at the window, at the cycle path, at the empty, ordinary morning, watching. Thank you for listening to Stillwater Chronicles, where even the quietest mornings can carry something you didn't expect to find. If this stillness stayed with you, if the pale light of that kitchen settled somewhere close, then let it remain a little while longer. Some messages, after all, were never meant to be understood. They were only ever meant to remind you that you are being watched over. Rest now. The morning is ordinary. The path outside is empty. And whatever left that voicemail, it already knows where you are.